Thank you very much. Well, using e-democracy to strengthen representative democracy, I have a clear interest in this as a councillor myself, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. But I hope I'm building on the contributions that we've heard this morning, because I think you'll find echoes of what they've said and what I'm going to say. Kingston-on-Thames is where I'm a councillor. It's a London borough, but it has a definite identity of its own. It's known as the Royal Borough of Kingston-upon-Thames because back in the 10th century, 7 kings of England were crowned there. It's got about 160,000 residents, so very similar in size to this town. The responsibilities there include education, social services, environmental services, including things like waste management and traffic, leisure, the arts, and economic development. And I have a role as a cabinet member for education and children's social services and for young people. So I was delighted to see we have members of it's a regional youth parliament here, is it? Yeah. One of my roles is to liaise with our member of the youth parliament for our national youth parliament in the UK. So I'm very interested in their work. Right, the challenge is this, because this worry has been expressed to me more than once by councillors around the country. Does greater participation by citizens in local government between elections reduce the role of elected representatives? And it is something we need to face up to. Now, I want to have a look at some of the settings in which elected representatives make decisions in the UK. And the first picture here is of a council chamber in Newcastle, in England. It's a typical horseshoe layout with a raised dais in front for the mayor or whoever's chairing meetings. It's often a bit more semicircular, and we saw a picture in Stephen Cliff's presentation of the Minnesota State Chamber, which I was very privileged to visit a few weeks ago, which is very clearly a horseshoe shape. That is fairly typical. I don't know whether that applies here. I've not seen your council chamber here in Birmingham, but I know that's a very common pattern around the world. My question is, where do the members of the public sit? The second picture is another council chamber, this one in Scotland, in North Lanarkshire. It's a sort of fisheye view taken from the position of the person who's chairing the meeting. And there you can see the public gallery. It's there at the back, on a shelf. And there's a barrier there between the members of the public and their elected representatives. My question is, what messages do these give to citizens about participation? What messages do they give about the importance of elected representatives? And the thing to notice is that both these chambers are new. They're modern, they're wired up, they've got good sound systems, they've got fixed seating. Now, I'm sure that in both those councils there are some meetings that take place in other locations which are less formal. But to be honest, if you've got a magnificent chamber like that, you're going to use it, aren't you? So I wanted to look at this fear that we're talking about. The fear that if we start moving from representative democracy towards participatory democracy, we're on a slide towards direct democracy, which I think most of us realise is not really applicable in anything but very small organisations. One's a kind of a democracy in which the citizens can speak and decide directly through referenda and meetings on what they want to happen. Doesn't really work in the kind of larger society that makes up our citizens and towns. So there is a fear that representatives may be squeezed out by increasing participation. And what I really want to have a look at is an alternative model of democracy, which is two-dimensional rather than just one-dimensional, as we saw just now. First of all, there are the citizens whose participation may vary from weak through to strong.
But there's also the dimension of the elected representatives, who again may be weak or strong. I think in the UK we would characterise this as political leadership. Now, in traditional representative democracy, we have strong elected representatives, but the citizen participation is relatively weak. It's the model represented by those council chambers we were looking at. Representatives are elected to make decisions for the well-being of their electors. They may be elected with a mandate to actually carry out certain policies. It can be quite a lonely position to be in as an elected representative in that context. And sometimes elected representatives can be caught out. They can be surprised. They think they know what the citizens want, but they find they haven't got it right. They, in turn, are perceived by the citizens to be powerful but distant. Now, as I said, the fear is that slide down to direct democracy. The fear for many councillors like myself is that if we let the citizens get more active, we will lose any powers that we might have. And even worse, there is a fear more realistically that on the way down, what will happen is that it's the loudest people in society who will dominate the agenda, who will both set the agenda and actually set the outcomes. It's the people who shout the loudest, who are the most articulate, who have access to the most tools, who have the greatest confidence, who will actually determine what happens for the whole of the society, even though that may not be the best solution for society as a whole. But at least direct democracy is fair. This is perceived as being unfair. So what are the alternatives? Well, we could all give up. The black hole, the power vacuum with no effective government, run by civil servants. So it wouldn't be no government, it would be government by bureaucracy. But there'd be no policy framework, and there would be no scrutiny of decisions that were made. There would, most importantly, be no drivers for innovation or change. What I think we need to do is explore very strongly this transition to participatory representative democracy. This is where participation is encouraged by strong leaders, where we as representatives are community leaders. Although for the UK audience here, I must say I'm seeing this in a much rather stronger way than that viewed by the ODPM in its most recent documents about the 10-year strategy for local government. I think there's a stronger role we can play than is envisaged there. And also, for those who are familiar with the literature, Professor Stephen Coleman, who claims he is the only professor of e-democracy in the world. He also claims he's the best one, but then I tell him he's the worst one as well. He actually refers to it as direct representation. I'm not quite so happy about that phrase. I'm sticking with participatory representative democracy. We need spaces to carry out participatory representative democracy. And here are a few. That's a council chamber. That's the council chamber in Kingston. That's where I do my work. And you'll see we've turned the horseshoe round. It faces, here's the horseshoe here. I mean, there's nobody there at the moment. There's the horseshoe there. And here are the seats where the public sit. And the public can contribute to any debate on any subject, at the chair's discretion, of course. As well as public question time, they can actually contribute to any discussion. And that's true of all our meetings. And here's another meeting. Last night I should have been at this one. This is our neighbourhood. This is a quarter of the council meeting locally in a school hall with members of the public. And we get 50 to 100 people turning up for these meetings. There's a gap there. That's because I slipped out to take the photo, but that's where I should be sitting. Very open, an open shape, very participatory. In fact, sometimes we as members find it difficult to communicate with each other. It's much easier to communicate with and listen to the members of the audience. But formal meetings are only a small part of participation. A little group of residents getting together, looking at some plans, perhaps with a council officer and with an elected representative, to actually work out what the issues are around this particular proposal that's been put forward, how it really will impact on people, what changes can be made. And there's traditional standing in the street talking about someone getting very animated there about I think it's a petition that's being filled in. The person on the right is actually one of our elected representatives on the Greater London Assembly. Now, in my view, the role of a participatory representative is this. It's to ensure that all voices are heard, to balance the conflicting demands and needs, to encourage citizens themselves to find the solutions, not to impose solutions on them, to make decisions that are more sustainable. And that's very much tied up with the previous point. If citizens are involved in finding the solutions, then the decisions are likely to be better decisions. But your representative is still accountable for the decisions that are made. They also need to explore the idea of partnership very closely. Partnership, of course, with citizens, but also partnership with other public service agencies, other bodies that are providing services to their citizens, with the suppliers, the commercial suppliers of services, and of course with the community and pressure groups that we all meet. But of course, in this model, the pressure groups become part of the solution, not part of the problem. Together, we are stronger. Now, where does e-democracy? I spent a lot of time talking about participative democracy, but that's because that's what e-democracy is moving us all towards. So how does e-democracy fit in? Well, my belief, it enhances participation, first of all, by broadening access. I don't want to get into long discussions about who has access to the technology. For me, what e-democracy does is actually provide access to people who at present don't use the current channels of access. Of course, e-democracy always is going to exist in the multimedia context, which you are so doing so well in championing. Of course, it is a strand. It is one of the channels by which communication can happen. So it does broaden access to some new groups. It does support ground-up activism. It improves consultation. It can help to identify issues and set the agenda in the first place. Most importantly, of course, it can enable networking. Even in a small geographical area, people are not networked with the people who share their interests and concerns. And this enables them to put themselves in touch with each other. It encourages collaborative problem solving, and it creates social capital. So now I want to just revisit that diagram again and say, well, what is the impact of e-democracy on that? Is it a threat? Because it's going to allow the loudest people to be even louder? Or is it a catalyst for change towards a more participatory model, which is clearly where I wish it to go? And a quote here: democratic change is essentially a slow process that is as much about addressing underlying cultural beliefs as it is about altering specific processes. And I think previous speakers have made the point that whatever tools you give people, the tools themselves are not the solution. The tools enable processes to happen which have to be thought out in terms of their overall impact. So I want to tell you now a little bit about the project which I chair. I'll leave you to read that while I take a drink. This is thought to be, we claim to be, and nobody's disagreed with us, the largest e-democracy project in the world. We've had funding so far of getting on for €7 million. This is a project about e-democracy at local government level. It's not about central government, although we're having an impact on them. It's not about voting, it's about participation. And it's managed by a collaboration of local authorities. It's the only one of a set of national projects, e-government projects, which has councillors on the board, so I'm delighted to be chairing this project. And this is a quote from our project. We think, because within the national project, we have, as you'll gather, over 20 smaller projects. And we developed these criteria for evaluating the projects, and it's been through quite a rigorous evaluation process, led in fact by Stephen Coleman, who I referred to earlier. Right, a project enhances democracy. See if you agree with this. If it supports representative democracy, well, I would agree with that one, wouldn't I? If it engages citizens, if it makes decision-making transparent, and this is the one I really like, if it manages conflict as well as consensus. Our political structures, our democratic ideals are based on the importance of conflict, the importance of a strong opposition to an administration, the importance of open debate about difficulties within proposals, working perhaps towards consensus wherever possible, but bringing those conflicts into the open. A project enhances democracy if it improves political equality of citizens, of views, of needs. And if it increases community control. And I've been challenged about that word control, but I'm still happy for it to be there. See what you think. Within the national project, we've been working in 3 areas, with communities, with councillors, and with councils, and with the communications that must flow and the interactions between the 3 of them. Today, obviously, with a political focus, I'm going to particularly look at the kind of things that have an impact on councillors, but in fact it's quite difficult to make that distinction. But I'm going to be looking at 5 particular projects that we've been working on, but there are plenty others, and I'll give you in a moment a link where you can go and read up about all the others that have been happening as well. I seem to have managed to delete one which I thought was there, in which case we may only have 4, and I'll have to tell you about the other one. Don't know how that happened. Weblogs. We've had a project encouraging councillors and also senior managers in local government, chief executives and directors, to also get involved in blogging. And we've had enormous support, actually, from what I refer to as the Minnesota Mafia, which is some colleagues of Stephen Clift, who've actually been doing some fascinating work with blogging in some small towns and suburbs of the area, and have actually provided us with encouragement and, to a certain extent, tuition in how to make the most of this when you're blogging as a councillor or as a local government official. And you can see there's one of mine there at the front, where I was recently blogging about probably the most exciting project that's been going on in my ward, which is building of a new community centre. And I've been providing a sort of photo record of that and updating people on what's going on. But in fact, I write about all sorts of things. The one on the left with the black background, Stephen Hilton is director of I just don't know his job title, but he's very heavily involved with consultation at Bristol City. And he's had a absolutely fascinating blog over there. And actually the fact that he's visually impaired has also brought a real extra dimension to that, because he's able to convey some of the frustrations in his professional life that brings. I moved them around the wrong way, that was all. So you are going to get this one. This is another one about online surgeries for young people. And as you can see from the young people there, you can probably work out we were targeting at the sort of 14 to 16 age group through the schools. So this was a tool which was used in quite controlled circumstances, where we have a curriculum around citizenship in English schools, and the teachers there were preparing the students to understand the roles of different elected representatives, what their areas of competence and areas of influence were. And then, at a particular day, they had an opportunity to go online and have one-to-one chats. In some cases, it was 2 young people and 1 representative, with any one of several who would be online ready for them on that occasion. And the kind of people we called on, we made sure for each group that did this, we had a Member of Parliament, we had members of the Regional Assembly, for at least some of them. We always had some local councillors, and our Member of the Youth Parliament took part in most of them as well. In one case, she was on the asking questions side, and the other, she was actually the person being asked. And that produced some fascinating issues, and was quite an eye-opener for us as representatives. It's the kind of issues that these young people were interested in. And of course, for me, it was not surprising, but it was surprising for others, that young people are interested in the same issues as everybody else. So we didn't need to, ghettoise it into the young people's issues. More questions were asked about the war in Iraq than anything else, actually. But there were questions about lots of local issues: youth provision, graffiti, antisocial behaviour, the state of the streets, all the sort of things that everybody wants to talk about. Another one of the projects we've initiated is Email Your Counsellor. On the face of it, a very simple idea. Anybody can go to this website, can email their postcode there. Okay, and immediately they get, actually there's an intermediate page which lists for you who your counsellors are, and then you can link through to the one you want to send a message to. Simple. I actually linked through to my own, of course. I found that Councillor Mary Reid was actually my local councillor, so I could have sent myself a message. The value of this, there are actually a couple of other products very similar around in the UK. This can be integrated into any council's website, so that it isn't a separate site, so that it is a tool that they can use. Because it is being underpinned by the Local Government Association, which is the umbrella body for all local authorities, it does mean that this will be kept up to date. I'm sure here you have the same position that we do, that councillors resign or are taken ill, and you have to have by-elections. I've got by-election in Kingston in a couple of weeks' time. So there are weekly changes, actually, in the councillors around the country. If we take parish councils as well, which will be added to this, we're going to have there are 21,000 in the country. So it's a big database to maintain. But the idea is this must be maintained. Now, Stephen referred to issues forums, and this is the one of the ones that we asked his organisation to set up for us. 2 places, Brighton and Hove, and in Newham, very different places. Newham in quite a deprived area of inner London, and Brighton and Hove, which is quite an affluent town on the south coast. And they've been both very successful. I'm fascinated, actually, by the comments that Steve made earlier about to set your sights low. I think that's a really good bit of advice, because when we took on this national project, you know, the idea is, how do we bring e-democracy to local government in England? Impossible. No, let's do lots of small projects and see if we can make them successful. So here you have something very localised. It's just in Brighton and Hove. But it's a model now that other local authorities can pick up and use. And this is another project which I was particularly interested in. The BBC in the UK has got sort of a high credibility rating, as indeed it does around the world. And the BBC did some research 3 or 4 years ago about the lack of participation and interest in politics. And they came up with a strategy for addressing this, part of which was to actually have more populist television shows, you know, with people in shirt sleeves instead of suits, and women. But they also developed a very interesting website as part of their main site, which at that stage they called ICANN. And you can see the address there. They've since quite recently gone through a complete redesign and relaunch, and it's now called Action Network. And I would advise you to go and have a look at that. And the idea of this piece of work is that any citizen can go online and start a campaign on any issue they're interested in. It could be as local as they like, or it could be a national campaign. They're given all the tools for doing that, for having online discussions, for recruiting supporters and activists who'll be actively involved in the campaign, for getting people to sign up to say they support it, for people to contribute, for people to post notices about where a meeting is being held, for example. But the BBC balances that up by providing advice and links to all the advice that anybody who's setting up a campaign could possibly need, including similar campaigns or similar topic-based themes in the area in which people are running a campaign. Now, this struck me as something really exciting, a really important e-democracy tool that's already there, run by a trusted third party. And I wanted to explore how local authorities could actually enhance what the BBC was doing. So we worked with them, and at 2 levels. I say we, it was actually Kingston. You see, I've got slightly partisan about this because we took the lead on this one. In 2 ways. First of all, by working with local community groups and the BBC to explore with them how they could actually use it. But secondly, by developing a syndication approach with the BBC so that we can syndicate our material from Kingston Council that's relevant onto the BBC site and vice versa. And I think that there's a lot of interesting value in that. So if you have in the countries you come from a trusted third party like this, it's a fantastic resource if you can use them. And of course the interesting thing about the BBC is that they pick up issues on BBC iCan and turn them into news stories. Radio and television. We don't have the benefit of local television channels for all sorts of regulatory reasons in the UK in quite the same way as in other countries. So this is another way in which we can catch their eye. Now, if you want to know more about the whole project, this is our project's website. And if you look down the left-hand side, there's a link there to the pilots. And the pilots were the 20 or more actual projects within the main project. And if you go to that, I haven't got an image of it here. If you go to that, you'll find that it's divided into the 3 categories of councils, councillors, and communities. And in each one, you will find information about projects that sort of fit into that category. Let's say a lot of them cross over. On top of that, we've produced a large number of research documents and how-to documents and guides and so on. And you can see here some recent reports that went up a couple of weeks ago, which are particularly useful, I think, for local councils, in fact, and I'll be referring more to them in tomorrow's session. Okay, there's my sign-off. But at this stage, I think it would be... I do have a video to show you, a very short one that we've made, particularly about, councillors and a couple of the projects that you've already seen in the presentation. So if we can move to the video now, please.
No idea.
No, I don't know what a blog is.
I don't know. I ain't got a clue what one is.
I have my own blog.
There's a lot of discussion about whether blogging per se is a fad, and I don't really think it is. It may have a different name, but ultimately websites that are easy for non-technical people to put their thoughts about the world onto are always going to be successful.
It's a good way of getting your point across to people, and it's a good way of communicating. That's the word I was looking for.
When the National Project decided that it would be running a blogging project, I thought, well, I'll go and be a guinea pig for that as well. I'm very glad I did, because I've learnt so much from working with this community of people and with our colleagues in America.
I started writing mine about a year ago. I'd seen other people's blogs and been reading other people's blogs, and I'd seen a few councillors who had started their own blogs, and it looked like that they were having a good dialogue with people about things that they believed in.
It is much easier than I would have thought it was, but equally, I mean, I've been doing it as part of a programme and I've been receiving coaching on it, and the coaching has been really useful.
And if you can type, you can do it. I tend to write my stuff as I'm kind of going to and from places on public transport. I've got a PDA and I just tap it out on the PDA and then connect it to the PC and there you go. Yeah, on the underground, kind of on the bus. That's when I tend to do most of it.
No, I'm usually in my armchair late at night, just clicking away at the laptop. So.
For me, the biggest impact is the collective phenomenon of citizens being producers of information and not just consumers of information.
I think councillors have got to realise that if they are going to be understood by the public, they've got to move themselves into the space that the public is actually in. And that is a space of phone-ins, letters to the editor, websites. It's much more interactive, it's much more dialogical, it's much more conversational. And I think that's a great lesson for councillors, that what is sustainable is to talk in the language of people who they represent.
The project itself is a means to allow anybody in England and Wales to contact their local councillor. It's an electronic way of getting in touch with a person or persons who represent them locally. So what it does is allow people to enter in their postcode or their street, and that will then give them a link to their councillor, and they can then contact them on any matter which they feel their councillor can help them with.
But it does take you to a wider audience.
Yeah.
I mean, I was working on a particular problem with housing associations, and I got a response back from an assembly member in Wales, which showed me a different alternative that I hadn't even considered. So it takes the political debate onto a different level, and that's been really helpful for me.
The other thing that I'd emphasise, I suppose, is that you don't need anybody to set up a blog for you. You don't need your council to do it. You just go to one of the platforms and start it yourself. Plus, you don't run into all of those difficult bits about your politics and the rate's not paying for politics.
You can be free to be the politician that you are, the local representative you are, not constrained by in the way that you would be if you were using council-supplied materials. And yet you can become immediately part of a whole network of people who are doing the same thing, so there's an enormous amount of peer support through that system.
Just finally, I was hoping to bring some handouts with me today to give to you all. Unfortunately, we hit traditional printing problems, and they're being produced today. So instead, I have got some copies, there aren't an awful lot left, of a leaflet that we produced a while ago, which does give an outline of the range of projects that we've been doing, seen particularly from the point of view of elected representatives. So there are a few copies there, and you're very welcome to take those afterwards. Thank you.